Welcome back for this afternoon program, and we again have a plenary session for you prepared, and then we have another workshop round for you prepared, and then we will also have a final wrap-up which Rita and I will do jointly. And we're very happy actually that we can continue the discussion on academic freedom this afternoon. And as you might already see, the PowerPoint is already on from Professor Noel Kemper on navigating academic freedom and research integrity. Because, as you might all already know, recently a new report appeared from the Royal Academy, the KNW, on academic freedom. And the question is, of course, from within the community of responsible conduct of research and research integrity, more and more also the relation with academic freedom is being explored. And that's why we are also discussing this topic that much today. So let me introduce briefly the speaker before I give the floor to you. So I will just read this out loud, actually, your bio. The Professor Noel Kemper is the chair of the Committee for the Pursuit of Scientific Freedom of the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences of the Netherlands. And we're so happy to have him. He's also a distinguished university professor, international law and sustainability at the University of Amsterdam, and academic director of SEVEN, the Interdisciplinary Climate Institute of the University of Amsterdam. Previously, until a year ago, I think, he was dean of the Amsterdam Law School and interim member of the board of the University of Amsterdam and president of the European Society for International Law. So we're so happy, glad to have you, and without further delay, I would say the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great that today we can combine and connect the topics of academic freedom and research integrity. So my thinking about this topic was heavily shaped in the final stages of my deanship at the Amsterdam Law School. So what is on public record about this is this. About 5 years ago, the Amsterdam Center for Tax Law approached Netflix to participate in a research project on digital taxation. And in the internal memo that was sent to potential contributors, the center had listed potential benefits of cooperation between Netflix and the research center. And among others, this memo said that the center could help explain Netflix's business model to the outside world. Now, when those memos became public, it was suggested that the center had been prepared to offer tax advice disguised as academic research. So quite a row erupted, parliamentary questions followed. Minister Dijkgraaf, as he then was, stated that the tax law group had created the appearance of a conflict of interest. Later, it came before the CWI, and that committee concluded that there indeed was an appearance of a conflict of interest, but that no rules on integrity had been violated. Now, beyond the committee's formal finding, this case and the aftermath of this case revealed for me the complexity of balancing considerations of academic freedom on the one hand and research integrity on the other. So we have to assume that initially the group was led by considerations of intellectual curiosity into digital taxation, which indeed is a fascinating topic, combined with a wish to have societal impact, but perhaps also driven by scarcity of funding, as we all are in universities. And partnerships created an additional basis to engage in research. But precisely that dependence on external funding, combined with external parties who have an interest in particular lines of research on taxation, made the project vulnerable for external influence. And the freedom to define research questions then may yield to financial necessity and influence. And here is where my talk begins. This is actually where the balancing act begins. Because the situation is not so black and white as it may appear at first sight. It involves very fundamental questions. How much autonomy should a group have in the way they approach external parties, like Netflix? How much influence do we allow funders to have on the shape and the direction of research questions? And should certain types of partners or certain types of research questions be banned altogether from research? Each of these questions require continuous balancing acts in a very concrete and specific context. And this is not the only example. We have seen similar questions in the debate on cooperation with the fossil fuel industry. We will see them more and more about cooperation with the defense industry. And of course, we have seen similar questions in discussion whether researchers could speak openly about all dimensions from all sides on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and whether or not researchers should be free to enter into partnerships with Israeli partners. These dilemmas have become a structural feature of academic life, and they will become more and more so when research groups across the Netherlands engage on good grounds in partnerships with external partners to make sure that their research is societally grounded and will have an impact. In the report of the I skipped these two slides, but these were the headings of the UvA's newspaper on the Netflix case. In the report by the Royal Academy of Sciences on academic freedom, we did touch on these dilemmas, but did so mainly from the perspective of current threats to academic freedom, threats arising from funding, from cooperation with external parties, from intimidation, and from academic culture. We did not say so much in this report on the relationship with academic or with research integrity. In fact, upon my rereading of the report this week, I noted that only 3 times the term integrity appears in the main text. So what I want to do today is to expound on this mutual dependence and relationship between academic freedom, as we discussed it in this report on the one hand, and research integrity on the other. And I will do so through 3 what I call balancing acts, each describing a different way in which freedom and integrity are mutually dependent and can actually also be in tension. The main idea that should appear from my talk is that while it is fundamental that academic freedom is exercised in a responsible way, and that academic freedom is limited by research integrity, we should prevent that rigid procedures for integrity, that institutional control, and that conformity to group norms undermine the very freedom we seek to guard. So there are synergies, but there are also potential tensions that I want to highlight. Okay, so I proceed with 3 balancing acts. And I call the first one freedom versus rigidity. So the idea here is that freedom can endanger integrity if it is used carelessly, in an irresponsible way. At the same time, integrity rules can suffocate freedom if they are not based on trust in a researcher and a research group. The KNW report recognizes that academic freedom, while fundamental, is of course not unqualified and not unlimited. Indeed, the Netflix example shows that when these limits are not duly observed, academic freedom does raise questions, can raise questions of integrity. It can even erode the very trust on which science is based. So it is essential, and there can be no doubt and no dispute about that. It's essential that in the exercise of academic freedom, we need to adopt and apply strictly practices, rules, and procedure that prevent undue influence by external parties on independence, and that would limit freedom. Yet, and this is the balancing, yet we have to recognize that it may be too easy to see integrity only as a precondition and as a limit to academic freedom. The pendulum can swing the other way. And that happens when integrity rules, when integrity practices become so rigid that they suffocate and undermine freedom. So as researchers, we may become so fearful of creating any suggestion that our independence is compromised, that this will undermine the freedom to engage in important fundamental research. In part, this undesirable side effect of integrity may result from the construction of the very principle of integrity. Let me give one example. The Netherlands Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, both in the 2018 version and in the draft new version, says that independence means that in choosing methods, in assessing data, and in weighing alternative explanations, researchers should not, quote, be guided by considerations that are external to science, for example, of a political nature, unquote. So this language has survived in the draft of the new Integrity Code. So the term political in this sentence has raised fundamental questions in an era where many researchers are driven not only by intellectual curiosity, but also by the recognition of the deeply political nature of many fields of study, and are guided by a sense of responsibility to contribute to a better world. So the question is this: can one say that a scholar researching, say, colonial history or unjust fossil fuel exploitation in the oceans are guided by considerations of a political nature? Can the pressure on such a scholar to remove any appearance of such guidance be at odds with academic freedom? So here, the line between scholarly responsibility and academic and civic engagement becomes very blurred. Yet, it is a line that the integrity frameworks must guard carefully if they are to protect integrity, yet not undermine academic freedom. Undesirable effects of integrity frameworks on freedom also may result from processes and procedures. We have built an awful lot of processes and procedures to prevent any appearance of lack of independence. So researchers who want to enter into a partnership have to go through many circles and procedures to get finally a green light. We have to submit proposals for cooperation with third parties to multiple committees that review threats and risks, and when they are risk averse, may kill cooperation in a very early stage. Sometimes, of course, for good reasons, no doubt about it. But if such procedures become overly risk averse, driven by fear of controversy, freedom and creativity may wither. For instance, and I've encountered this myself, an interdisciplinary project may struggle to proceed because no existing ethics committee feels responsible or has the courage to evaluate a method that sits between disciplines. And the question is also whether a review committee, anxious to uphold the principle of responsibility, will give the green light for cooperation with, say, a bank, that has not done enough to reduce its investment in fossil fuel exploitation. Or say with a dairy company that may not have done enough to protect the welfare of animals. Integrity processes designed to protect independence then can become a cage when it is too risk-averse and too overly procedural. The draft new code rightly notes, and this is very good language, that, I quote, excessively strict rules on acceptable behavior can hinder the exploratory nature of science and place unnecessary limits on academic freedom. So this is very important and very good language. It is important to ensure that this recognition in words also aligns with practice. So the principles and procedures for integrity must be applied in a proportionate and flexible way so as to enable rather than reduce academic freedom. That's my first point. Second balancing act. Support versus control. So the starting point here is that research integrity cannot depend only on the moral compass of the individual researcher. It also depends on institutions, regulations that protect the conditions that allow integrity to thrive. So the KNW report states that academic integrity must be actively protected from external pressures that can distort research agendas and that can intimidate scholars. The draft new Code of Integrity reinforces this idea in its duty of care, stating that institutions must, I quote, safeguard academic freedom and protect researchers from improper pressure or interference. Without such external support, even the strongest personal conviction and commitment to integrity may be vulnerable. And that we can clearly see in the case of intimidation, which is a large part of the KNW report on academic freedom. So we noted the increasing practice of online harassment against researchers, which is really a growing threat to academic freedom, especially in polarized fields like migration, climate change, and public health. Here, clearly, a moral compass of individual researchers cannot possibly protect the safety and the independence of the individual researcher. We cannot expect researchers who fear for the safety to act openly and in full transparency. So here, external support clearly is necessary. So universities and governments should step in through legal protection, public backing of scholars under threat, and perhaps even through regulation of social media, however difficult that may be. Such measures do not limit academic freedom, they rather enable it. However, we must take care not to let support and regulation turn into over-regulation and control. And that line between supporting and safeguarding on the one hand and controlling on the other is very thin. And the result may be, when that line is crossed, that the effect is the opposite of what was intended. So one clear example are the rules on knowledge security. So clearly, individual researchers and institutions have a responsibility to prevent the misuse of sensitive new knowledge, dual-use knowledge, to protect that from espionage or from foreign influence. No doubt about this. So some government support here is necessary, for instance, by granting access to otherwise sensitive information on particular practices, on particular persons, on particular states or non-state actors. However, that support may easily overreach if they are not sufficiently grounded in trust in the institutions, in the researchers themselves. And here, of course, the well-known clear example is the proposed screening knowledge security legislation, that would require a blanket screening of researchers and students with possible access to certain technologies, regardless of actual risk. The KNW has rightly critiqued this proposed legislation as it risks over-regulation and it undermines institutional autonomy and it neglects the trust on which such regulation should be based. Somewhat more controversially, or perhaps not even somewhat, certainly more controversially, one could also see the university-wide ban on cooperation with Israeli partners, as the University of Amsterdam has now adopted, from this lens. So clearly, universities should support researchers in making a call whether or not they should cooperate with certain partners, Israeli or otherwise. One researcher cannot possibly assess the scale of involvement of a particular partner in a particular practice that leads, for instance, to fundamental violations of human rights. But some universities go much further and say that in this time frame, no cooperation with any Israeli institution can be given the green light. From a research integrity angle, this could be interpreted as saying that such cooperation could not possibly be responsible research, because responsibility means this awareness of the wider effects and implications of your research. But individual researchers may well raise the question whether that call should not be made on an individual basis, and whether this decision by the universities has not unduly curtailed the freedom of academic research, which includes the freedom to choose your own partners. So here's the paradox. With too little external support, integrity will not be able to withstand intimidation, coercion, and it may risk to becoming irresponsible research, being implicated in practices that no researcher should want to be in. On the other hand, with too much support and regulation, the spirit of integrity, the capacity, the space for independent judgment and a moral compass may be stifled by control. So here too, proportionality and trust must remain the guiding principles if such support is to enable and empower rather than limit academic freedom. I come to my third and final balance. This is between the individual and the collective. So here too we see a tension, which is rightly noted in the new text of the integrity codes. So this document refers to the, I quote, complex relation between collective responsibility and academic freedom. So this is a very important topic. So the starting point here has to be that academic freedom never is exercised only individually in isolation. It always takes place by necessity in research groups, in communities within which the particular researcher is embedded. Researchers are individually free, but their individual work is conditional on the integrity of the collective and the norms and the culture and the practice of that collective. So in the example of the tax law group and Netflix with which I started, it would have been way too simple to look only at the individual researchers who approached or who were talking to Netflix. We also had to look, and indeed the committee also looked, at the practices of the research group, of the faculty, and of the university as a whole. These institutions had and have a collective responsibility, a duty to uphold the standards that make individual freedom meaningful and trustworthy. At the same time, and there's the flip side, the code of conduct, the draft code of conduct, warns that an overemphasis on collective judgment, especially moral judgment, can threaten that very freedom. When the academic community begins to police opinion or define orthodoxy, integrity can become conformity. So in my current role of leading the Climate Institute at UvA, I have seen numerous examples, not necessarily in Amsterdam, but otherwise in the Netherlands and abroad, of discussions whether particular researchers or research groups that believe, that support that research, for instance, green growth or technological solutions to climate change, should be given the podium. Conversely, those who believe on scientific grounds or otherwise in green growth, in technological fixes for the climate change problem, may doubt whether we should give a podium to those who believe on scientific grounds or otherwise in degrowth, as the opposite to green growth. That debate can become very polarized. It is not entirely dissimilar from the debate we have had on whether those who want to explain and reconstruct the 7 October attacks by Hamas against the background of prolonged occupation should be given a podium, or whether those who want to explain or construct the Israeli responses from the background of an existential fear and feeling of threat of the Israeli community against the Palestinians. These are very contested ideas that some individuals hold dear, but that some collectivity may profoundly dislike. And the intense collective pressure in these debates can lead researchers to not to speak out on certain sensitive topics and even self-censure their findings. And that would strike at the heart of both integrity and academic freedom. So the 2026 draft code, which really has good language on this topic, rightly calls for a balance. Collective responsibility must support, not substitute, individual academic judgment. So the third balancing act here is that the collectivity, the group, the larger group, must provide the guardrails, the ethics for individual judgment, but it must also protect the space for the individual to challenge, to dissent, and even to disrupt. So here I come, I missed this one, I see now. But here I come to my wrap-up. So looking back, the tax law example on Netflix was a precursor. It was a small-scale reflection of the tensions that I've explored today. The tension between the freedom to choose research partners, on the one hand, and the demanding requirements of integrity on the other. The tension between supporting external cooperation on the one hand and controlling it, and between the autonomy of individual researchers and the responsibility and the values of the collective. So while academic freedom should be exercised in a collective way, the point of my talk is that a balance should be struck, and we should make sure that rigid procedures, institutional control, and conformity to group pressures do not undermine the very freedom we seek to protect. The balance here is key. And in that balance, commitment to principle, trust, and proportionality would seem to be the three most important considerations. The KNW report of 2025 recognizes so much, and it is really encouraging that the draft code, the new draft code of research integrity, much more than its predecessor, now explicitly recognizes the interdependence between academic freedom and research integrity, placing freedom at the heart of independence and weaving academic freedom into the institutional duties of care. Yet, these documents clearly are only the beginning. By themselves, they cannot possibly resolve the complex balanced judgments that you need in the type of cases I discussed. So safeguarding freedom and integrity in their mutual dependence requires ultimately a moral and a professional practice that involves commitment to principle, trust, and proportionality. It depends on universities, research groups, and individual researchers to embody these three principles in their work and in their practice. Importantly, it also depends on regulators and policymakers, say the government, who have to trust the academic community's ability to govern wisely that space between academic freedom and research integrity. Thank you very much.